I have lived a life full of sex. And I do not mean that as a confession, or a trophy, or a warning label that should be printed on my forehead in bold letters, although, depending on the decade, a warning label might have saved a few people some confusion. What I mean is this. When I look back at my life with honestly, without romance, without shame, without pretending to be more spiritual than I actually was on a Saturday night, I can see it now. Sex was there, not always in the bed, sometimes in the absence of the bed, sometimes in the marriage, sometimes in the fear, sometimes in the silence, sometimes in the app I promised myself I had deleted for the last time. Sex was there in the choices I made, in the places I went, in the people I stayed with, in the people I left, in the cities I visited, in the shirts I bought, in the diet I failed by Tuesday, in the gym membership that was supposed to be about health, but, let us be honest, was also about not looking like a collapsed lawn chair under fluorescent lights. Sex shaped how I saw my body. Sex shaped how I measured my worth. Sex shaped how much rejection hurt. Sex shaped how I understood marriage, masculinity, desire, fear, aging, loneliness, and even God. And now, at this age, 65 years old, after all the chasing, all the hiding, all the pretending, all the hunger, all the little deaths and little resurrections, I find myself asking a question I probably should have asked decades ago. Was sex the mirror of who I am? Or was sex the architect of the life I built? Because I married because of it. I hid because of it. I became celibate because of it. I traveled because of it. I spent more money I have should because of it. I feared aging because of it. I chased attention because of it. I confused being wanted with being loved because of it. And somewhere between all those desires and all those fears, life happened. That is the part nobody tells you. You think sex is something you do. Then one day you wake up and realize sex has been doing something to you. I grew up in a world that handed me a map before I even knew how to read it. The map was simple. Be a man. Find a woman, get married, buy a house, have children, work hard, smile in family photos, pretend you are not terrified, and when your body starts making certain demands, you aim those demands in the approved direction. That was the map. Nobody sat me down and said, "Here are the many possible architectures of desire. Choose the one that fits your soul." No. They gave me one simple blueprint. One house, one bedroom, one kind of love, one kind of future. And because I was young, I wanted to belong. And because sex was already a fire in my blood, I followed the map. I pursued women. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, not because I was trying to perform some grand deception. I pursued women because I was trying to become the man everybody told me I already was. And to be fair, there was real feeling there. There was tenderness. There was attraction. There was love, or at least the version of love I understood at the time. There was romance. There were moments when I looked at a woman and genuinely thought, yes, this is beautiful. And it was. The fact that another truth was buried inside me does not erase the truth that existed outside me. Life is not always a courtroom where one truth must defeat another. Sometimes two truths sit at the same table and make everyone uncomfortable. So, what did I do? I married. I became a husband. I became a father. I became the man in the photograph, the one standing beside the woman, the one holding the child, the one smiling as if he understood the assignment. And sex was there, quietly validating the whole structure. Every time I was desired by a woman, I felt confirmed. Every time I performed the role of husband, I felt safer. Every time I entered that marital bed, I thought, see, nothing is wrong. Everything is working. The machine is running. The funny thing about machines is that we only notice them when they break. As long as the engine turns on, we do not question the design. We do not open the hood. We do not ask why smoke is coming out of places where smoke should not be coming out. We just drive. And I drove that life for years. A good man, a responsible man, a family man, a man who wanted sex and found a socially acceptable way to organize his desire. That is what I see now. Sex did not only give me pleasure, sex gave me a role. It taught me where to stand. It taught me what to want. It taught me what kind of man I was supposed to become. And for a while, I believed it. Not because I was foolish, because the world rewarded me for believing it. When I loved a woman, I was normal. When I married, I was mature. When I became a father, I was complete. Nobody asked what part of me was missing. Nobody asked what other hunger was pacing in the basement. Nobody asked why, even in the middle of a life that looked full, something inside me still felt unfed. And honestly, I did not ask either. Because when the house looks beautiful from the street, you can ignore the strange noises in the walls for a long time, especially if the neighbors are clapping. But buried things have a way of breathing. You can cover them with marriage, you can cover them with religion, you can cover them with fatherhood, bills, work, birthday parties, school events, Sunday lunches, and the respectable exhaustion of adult life. A desire is a terrible tenant. It refuses to move out. It may stop paying rent, but it stays in the building. For me, it started quietly. A glance, a thought, a fantasy I tried to push away before it finished forming. A man walking past me and something inside my body answering before my mind had prepared a legal defense. At first, I called it curiosity. Curiosity is such a polite word, isn't it? It wears glasses. It sounds academic. It makes trouble look like research. A man says, "I am just curious," and suddenly he has given himself permission to stand at the edge of a door he knows very well he wants to open. And let me say this with love. No grown man is ever just curious at midnight with good Wi-Fi and a locked door. We know what we are doing. We just prefer language that comes with plausible deniability. At first, I only looked. Then I thought. Then I wondered. Then I imagined. Then I promised myself it would never go further. And then, of course, it went further. Because desire does not respect press releases. You can announce to yourself, "This is not who I am." But the body has its own public relations department, and sometimes it leaks information before the official statement is ready. When I finally experienced intimacy with a man, something happened that frightened me more than guilt. It felt natural. That was the terrifying part. Not scandalous, not theatrical, not like lightning splitting the sky while violins played. Just natural. Like my body had been waiting for me to stop arguing with it. Like coming home and realizing I had spent half my life carrying the wrong house keys. Like sitting in a chair that fit. And that realization did not make my past fake. It made my present complicated. I loved my wife. I had loved women. I had enjoyed sex with women. That was true, but this was true too. And this truth had a different temperature. It did not feel like a performance. It did not feel like a role. It did not feel like I was taking an exam in masculinity and hoping to pass. It felt like recognition. And recognition is dangerous. Once you recognize yourself, it becomes very hard to go back to being a stranger. That is when I began to understand the second way sex shaped my life. First, sex shaped the man I thought I was supposed to be. Then sex introduced me to the man I had buried. It became a door, not just to pleasure, to identity, to memory, to grief, to anger, to all the years I had spent trying to be understandable to other people while remaining a mystery to myself. And I wish I could tell you that discovery made everything easier. It did not. Discovery does not automatically give you freedom. Sometimes discovery gives you a mirror you are not ready to look into. I saw myself, and then I panicked, because seeing yourself is one thing. Choosing what to do with that vision is another. Then came the dark years, the years of whispers, the years of fear, the years when sex was no longer only pleasure or identity. Sex became danger. Sex became a question of survival. I remember the news. I remember the silence. I remember how people talked about AIDS with a mixture of terror, judgment, ignorance, and cruelty. I remember the way certain men disappeared from rooms, from neighborhoods, from photographs, from conversations. One month, they were vibrant. The next month, someone said their name in a lower voice. And then, they were gone. I was not afraid of being gay. Let me be very clear about that. I was afraid of dying. There is a difference. People love to simplify the past. They want one explanation: shame, religion, family, culture. But for me, fear stood at the center. I had touched something true in myself, and almost immediately the world taught me that truth might kill me. So I chose survival, or at least what I thought survival required. I became celibate, and I did not become celibate in a romantic, monk on a mountain kind of way. There were no candles, no white robe, no sudden enlightenment, no birds landing on my shoulder because I had transcended desire. Please, I was not a saint. I was scared. That is the truth. My body still wanted what it wanted. My desire had not died. My attraction to men had not disappeared. But fear had become louder than desire. So, I closed the door. I stopped looking. I stopped touching. I stopped risking. I told myself I was being responsible. I told myself I was being mature. I told myself I had finally learned how to control myself. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had not conquered desire. I had hidden from it. I became celibate not because I had found peace, but because I was terrified of what sex could cost me. But let me tell you something. When a man says he is above temptation, check his browser history. Not because he is evil, because he is human. Celibacy can be holy. It can be peaceful. It can be chosen from a place of clarity. Mine was not. Mine was a locked room with a motivational poster on the wall. I was not free from sex. I was organized by the fear of it. That is one of the strangest realizations of my life. Even when I stopped having sex, sex kept shaping me. It shaped where I did not go. It shaped who I did not meet. It shaped what I did not say. It shaped the risks I refused to take. It shaped the silence I learned to live inside. The absence of sex became another kind of presence. A ghost at the table. A locked door at the end of the hallway. A hunger I pretended not to hear, because acknowledging it would require admitting I was still alive. And that is the irony. I chose celibacy because I wanted to survive, but in some ways, I stopped living. I did not die from AIDS, but a part of me disappeared anyway. Quietly. No funeral, no announcement. Just a man learning how to shrink his own life so fear could feel comfortable. Years passed. The world changed, medicine changed, language changed, the culture changed. The fear did not vanish completely, but it no longer sat on my chest like a stone every time desire entered the room. There were new words, new tools, new possibilities, safer sex, even though it doesn't feel the same. Testing, treatment, prep. Conversations that had once been impossible became ordinary enough to happen over coffee. And then came the apps. Oh, the apps. Those little glowing confession booths we carry in our pockets. A whole city of desire squeezed into a rectangle that also tells you the weather and reminds you to buy paper towels. What a time to be alive. Suddenly, after years of silence, there was a door. Then another door, then 15 doors. Some of them had shirtless pictures, some of them had no face, some of them had bios that said, "mask only," which is always funny because nothing screams masculine like typing requirements into a profile while holding your phone at a flattering angle. I told myself I was simply exploring, and maybe I was, at first. But after decades of starvation, exploration can turn into a buffet very quickly. And when a man who has been hungry for years finally reaches the buffet, he does not start with a salad. He starts making decisions that concern both nutritionists and theologians. I wanted everything. I wanted the youth I had missed. I wanted the freedom I had denied myself. I wanted the men I had imagined. I wanted the nights I had feared. I wanted to touch proof that I was not dead. I wanted to be desired by men, because being desired by men felt like a referendum on the self I had buried. Every message felt like oxygen. Every reply felt like validation. Every meeting felt like history correcting itself. And every rejection felt ridiculous and devastating at the same time. There is nothing quite like being a grown man with bills, responsibilities, and back pain staring at a phone because someone named Jim Top 82 stopped responding. You look at the screen thinking, "Sir, I survived marriage, fatherhood, taxes, and the AIDS years. Are you really going to destroy me with 3 dots that never become a sentence?" But that is what hunger does. It makes small things feel enormous. The world had changed, and I had changed with it. But I was beginning to realize that I had not simply reclaimed sex. I had given sex a promotion. It was no longer just part of my life. It was managing my calendar. It was influencing my mood. It was deciding which city looked interesting. It was telling me which shirt to wear. It was whispering, "Maybe lose 5 pounds," while I pretended I cared about cardiovascular health. And listen, I do care about health. But there is health, and then there is standing in front of the mirror at 10:30 at night, asking whether the lighting makes you look distinguished or like a tired potato. This was my second puberty. And second puberty is cruel because it gives you teenage desire with adult consequences and a lower tolerance for bad mattresses. I was awake again. That part was beautiful. But I was also hungry in a way that scared me. Because the hunger did not only want sex, it wanted time back. And time is the one lover that never returns your messages. This is the chapter I did not want to write. Because it is one thing to say, "I enjoy sex." It is another thing to say, "Sex has organized my life more than I ever admitted." That is a harder sentence. It does not sit comfortably in the mouth. It has corners. But here it is. Sex shaped where I traveled. I told people I wanted a weekend away, a change of scenery, a little adventure. But sometimes the adventure had a profile picture and was 127 miles away. I visited cities I did not care about because desire had drawn a circle around them on the map. I sat in airport terminals at absurd hours, pretending I was a spontaneous man of the world, when in truth, I was a man with a boarding pass and unreasonable expectations. There is a special kind of dignity that leaves your body when you are in an airport at 3 a.m., eating a sad sandwich, waiting for a stranger who may or may not still be interested by the time you land. That is when you realize desire has become a travel agent, and it charges fees. Sex shaped how I spent money. Hotels, flights, clothes, cologne, gym memberships, haircuts, skin creams with names so scientific they sound like they were developed by NASA for homosexual insecurity. I bought shirts not because I needed shirts, but because I needed armor. I bought jeans, not because denim had called me spiritually, but because I wanted the right pair to say, I am mature, but still available. Which is a difficult message for pants to carry, but I asked a lot of them. Sex shaped my body image. I did not only look in the mirror to see myself, I looked in the mirror to predict rejection. That is what many men never admit. We are not always grooming. Sometimes we are negotiating with the market. Will this stomach be forgiven? Will these wrinkles be interpreted as character or expiration date? Will this grey hair make me look wise, or will someone online call me Sir, in a way that feels less respectful and more like a funeral bell? Sex shaped how I aged, or more accurately, sex shaped how I feared aging. Because in gay spaces, aging can feel like becoming invisible in a room full of mirrors. You walk in carrying decades of stories, losses, wisdom, humor, tenderness, survival. And someone 28 years old looks right through you because his search filter stops at 45. 45. As if after 45, the body expires and must be moved to the clearance aisle. And the sad thing is, not that young men have preferences, of course they do. The sad thing is how easily I allowed those preferences to become my theology. I started measuring myself through strangers who owed me nothing. A message became validation, silence became judgment, a block became a verdict, and a man with no profile picture suddenly had the power of the Supreme Court. Sex shaped my mood. If the apps were active, I felt alive. If the messages came in, I felt chosen. If the night had possibilities, I felt younger. But if nobody responded, if the screen stayed quiet, if the local grid looked like a museum of unanswered prayers, something inside me sank. Not because I needed that particular man. Most of the time, I did not even know his name. Sometimes I knew less about him than I knew about the expiration date on the milk. But I needed the signal. I needed the proof. I needed the little electronic whisper that said, "You are still wanted." Sex shaped how I treated loneliness. Loneliness is a room. Sex is sometimes a visitor. But I kept confusing the visitor with a renovation. Someone could enter my body, enter my bed, enter my evening, and for a little while, the room felt less empty. But after he left, the room was still there. Same walls, same furniture, same silence. Same man standing in the middle of it, wondering why the echo had returned. Sex shaped my relationships. Sometimes I stayed because the sex was good, even when the love was poor. Sometimes I left because the sex was gone, even when tenderness remained. Sometimes I confused chemistry with compatibility. That is a very common mistake. Chemistry is when the body says yes. Compatibility is when your lives can survive breakfast. And many of us, especially men, have mistaken the first for the second and then acted surprised when the morning came with consequences. Sex shaped my forgiveness. There were things I forgave too quickly because the bed was warm. There were red flags I folded neatly and stored in a drawer because desire was making a convincing argument. There were moments when my dignity stood at the door with its suitcase and I said, "Can you wait until after the weekend?" That is the kind of honesty that hurts, but it is true. Sex shaped my imagination. I imagined lives with men I had only met twice, sometimes once, sometimes not at all, if the conversation was good and the lighting in the picture was kind. I imagined trips, mornings, laughter, belonging. I turned strangers into symbols because desire is a poet with poor boundaries. It can write an entire novel from one compliment. It can build a mansion from a message that says, "Hey," and then when the mansion collapses, you feel homeless, even though the man never promised you more than a Thursday night. Sex shaped my time. How many hours did I spend scrolling? How many evenings did I sacrifice to possibility? How many times did I tell myself, just 5 more minutes, and then look up to find that 5 minutes had become 2 hours, and my soul had somehow become dehydrated. Apps are strange things. They promise connection while training you to shop for people. And when you shop for people long enough, you begin to wonder if you are also on the shelf. Was I desirable enough? Fresh enough? Close enough? Masculine enough? Fit enough? Young enough? Enough. That word has followed me through every room. Sex shaped my sense of enoughness. And somewhere between airports, hotels, mirrors, workouts, unread messages, ghosting, fantasies, and Sunday morning regrets, I finally had to admit the sentence I had been avoiding. I was not just having sex was having me. It had my schedule, it had my money, it had my mood, it had my body image, it had my fear of aging, it had my loneliness on speed dial. It had become the architect of rooms I kept pretending I had built myself. And that realization did not make me hate sex, it made me look at my life with new eyes. Because the question was no longer, do I enjoy sex? Of course I do. I am alive, not made of drywall. The question was deeper. How much of my life had I arranged around being wanted? And how much of myself had I abandoned every time I confused being wanted with being whole? Every high has a come down. Every chase has a silence after it. Every fantasy eventually becomes a room with real lighting. And real lighting has never been kind to fantasy. After the encounter, after the adrenaline, after the body had done what the body came to do, life became quiet again. Sometimes too quiet. There is a silence after sex that tells the truth. Not always. Sometimes the silence is sweet. Sometimes it is tender. Sometimes it is the silence of two people resting inside a moment that feels human and warm. But sometimes the silence is a mirror. And I began to notice how often I did not like what it reflected. The man left behind after desire had been satisfied was still me, still aging, still afraid, still carrying memories, still carrying grief, still carrying the old marriage, the old fears, the old hiding, the old hunger. The orgasm ended. The questions did not. That was the problem. I had asked sex to silence questions it had no power to answer. Who am I? Am I still desirable? Am I still worth choosing? Did I waste my life? Did I come out too late? Is there still time? Will I die alone? Does my body still matter? Does anyone see me? Those questions cannot be answered by another man's hands. They can be interrupted. They can be postponed. They can be distracted for a while. But they return. They always return. And when they returned, I began to see the pattern. Sex had shaped how I loved, how I hid, how I survived, how I judged my body. I feared aging, how I confused attention with affection, how I mistook pursuit for purpose. And if sex had shaped so much of my life, then I had to ask the most frightening question of all. Who was I when sex was not present? Who was I when nobody wanted me tonight? Who was I when the apps were quiet? Who was I when the mirror was honest? Who was I when my body was not being praised, touched, desired, or evaluated? Who was I when there was no audience? That question terrified me more than rejection, because rejection still involves another person. But this question left me alone with myself. And I realized that I had neglected that relationship longer than any other. I had been married. I had been a father. Celibate, curious, hungry, desired, rejected. I had been many things to many people, but had I been a companion to myself? Had I sat with myself without trying to escape through someone else's body? Had I learned what brought me joy when nobody was watching? Had I built a life that did not collapse when desire went quiet? That is where the real work began. Not in the bedroom, not on the app, not in the airport, not in another city. In the quiet room after everything ended. The room I kept trying to leave. The room where I finally had to stay. And staying there was harder than any act of desire, because desire gives you motion. Self-confrontation gives you stillness, and stillness, for a man who has spent his life chasing, can feel like punishment before it becomes peace. I do not regret sex. I cannot. Sex gave me pleasure. Sex gave me children. Sex introduced me to women, to men, to longing, to tenderness, to my own body, and eventually to the parts of myself I had been trying to avoid. Sex made me feel alive when fear had made me small. Sex gave color to years that might have been gray. Sex was not the enemy. I need to say that clearly, because the lesson of my life is not that sex is bad. Please. If sex were bad, humanity would have ended after one generation, and the rest of us would have been spared taxes. Sex is powerful, beautiful, sacred, playful, healing. Sex can be ridiculous, sometimes all in the same evening, depending on your needs. The problem was not that I wanted sex. The problem was that I expected sex to answer questions it was never designed to answer. I asked sex to give me peace. I asked sex to make me feel chosen. I asked sex to make me young, to give me back the years fear had taken, to prove that coming out late had not cost me too much, to tell me I was still beautiful. I asked sex to silence loneliness, to become meaning. That is a very heavy burden to place on something that, if we are being generous, usually lasts 20 minutes, 30 if someone stretched beforehand and nobody ate too much pasta. And that is the humor and the tragedy of it. I was asking a moment to do the work of a lifetime. No wonder it kept failing, not because sex failed me, because I kept giving it the wrong job. Sex can touch the body. It can awaken memory. It can open doors. It can reveal desire. It can bring two people close enough to forget the world for a while. But sex cannot build your soul for you. Sex cannot grieve your lost years, cannot parent your inner child, cannot heal every rejection, cannot make aging disappear, cannot turn a stranger into a home, cannot replace the life you never built with yourself. And yet, for so many years, I kept trying. I married through the architecture of sex. I discovered myself through sex. I feared death through sex. I became celibate because of sex. I returned to life through sex. I traveled, spent, chased, waited, hoped, compared, and collapsed because of sex. Sex shaped the way I lived. But perhaps sex was never supposed to become the reason I lived. That is the difference I am learning now. Sex can be part of happiness. Sex can be a beautiful tool for intimacy, pleasure, connection, and play. But sex is not the foundation of peace, because peace has to remain when the body is alone. Peace has to remain when the phone is silent, when the mirror is cruel, when nobody chooses you tonight, when desire rests, when age arrives with its little suitcase and says, "I will be staying permanently." And maybe that is what I was searching for all along. Not sex, not even love in the way I imagined it. Peace. A peace that does not require applause. A peace that does not require a body beside mine. A peace that does not depend on being selected from a grid. That does not disappear when someone leaves. That can sit with me in the quiet and not panic. I still love sex. Let us not get dramatic. I have not become a statue in a church garden. I still have a body. I still have desire. I still have memories that could make a priest change the subject. But I am beginning to understand that desire is not the enemy. The enemy is letting hunger drive while pretending I am holding the wheel. The enemy is confusing pleasure with purpose. It is believing that if enough people want me, I will finally want myself. That is the lie, and I lived inside that lie for a long time. Now, I want something different. I want sex, yes, when it is joyful. I want touch, yes, when it is human. I want intimacy, yes, when it does not require me to abandon myself at the door. But I also want mornings that are not measured by last night's validation. I want friendships that do not depend on attraction. I want love that can survive breakfast. And I want to look at the man in the mirror, older now, softer now, wiser in some places and still foolish in others, and say, "You are more than who wanted you. You are more than who rejected you. You are more than who touched you, more than your fear." And perhaps that is the answer to the question. Is sex the mirror of who I am? Maybe not. Maybe sex was never the mirror. Maybe sex was the light that revealed the rooms inside me I still needed to enter. It showed me my loneliness. It showed me my courage. It showed me where I was wounded. And now, finally, I can thank it without worshipping it. I can enjoy it without obeying it. I can remember it without being ruled by it. I can desire without disappearing. Because I have lived a life full of sex, and sex has shaped the way I have lived. But the rest of my life belongs to something deeper, not the stranger who may or may not reply. The rest of my life belongs to me.